How did you get interested in architecture?
I was about 7 years old when my uncle in Colorado passed away and was sent his drafting tools from when he was an engineer. And I seemed to pick them up and I thought, well, this is kind of interesting and fun. And at that point, I was sort of debating on what I wanted to do. Right at 7 years old, you're wondering what you want to do for your life. And somehow I just decided that being an architect was kind of a great field for me. And so by the time I was like 8, 9, 10 years old, I was sketching and playing with pencils and pens. And I come from a family that are quite artistic in many ways. And so all of a sudden I'm starting to realize that some of that talent is coming out in my hand. And so I was quite young when I decided I was going to become an architect and just kept going in that direction. It's interesting because there are so many things that we do in our lives that you don't know why or how you're doing it. You just want to do it. And I think at that point I was driven. Unfortunately, I have my life partner who felt that that was a good idea too, many years later. But it was a very young cognition of mine that architecture was something I was going to do.
Perfect. What did your mom and dad do for a living?
There's a story with the Jeannette family that is quite intriguing. My father worked with North American Rockwell's predecessor, which was called Voltee, back in the 50s. And my mother was a singer who was also at Voltee. My dad had a band, and he pulled her into the band and became the singing artist for my dad's band. This was what they did on the side, so to speak. So my mom became quite highly sought after as a singer and pianist. My dad was quite an enthusiast of jazz, and both very talented musically. And it seems that all of the 6 kids in the family picked up part of those attributes. But my dad also ran a company. He was a manager of a company in the Downey area called Rancho Los Amigos, which was a rehabilitation center for people who had problems with limbs that they couldn't operate, or legs, arms, and he tried to help them become successful members of the community by teaching them talent and the ability to build things. And he created things that helped them control their motions. The spastic chair was one of my dad's inventions. And there were many things that he did to help people. And then after the war especially, he had many people that needed rehabilitation that he worked with. So he was very compassionate when it comes to working with people to help them with their issues in life. And an inventor as well. He invented, and we built, the family, the first cab over camper. So there were 8 of us in the family, and we built this thing out of plywood and put fiberglass over it, and it would sleep all 8 of us. There's a picture of it right behind you, Taylor. But he was quite an inventor and not afraid to do and step out with whatever idea he thought he could help someone with.
Do you still play an instrument? Do you play music?
Pardon me?
Do you play music still?
I'm the one in the family that plays music mainly by dialing the knob. So I do play music, yes.
Love it. Love it. Where did you go to college to study architecture?
I went to the University of Arizona in Tucson, and I had graduated from Cerritos College with an AA degree in architecture, and so I was able to go to the U of A and do specifically architecture. I'd taken all my GE courses, got them out of the way, and I was on my way into architecture, and that was fabulous.
What was the main thing you brought into your career and practice from your studies at U of A?
One of the most important things that I brought out that I gained from the University of Arizona's educational program is actually two things. One is the processing of a project, how you take it from developing the program, vetting out those issues that really don't need to worry about, but then zeroing in on the really important things and knowing how to dictate the design sequence. That was really critical, and it really is beneficial even today. The second thing I learned that was also very critical to the company today are the relationships between man and its environment. The solar aspects, both passive and active, which have to do with mechanical means or just simply siting the building properly, were some of the most important things in developing my talent in architecture. As I left the University of Arizona and came back to California, I was asked to become a participant in a committee to write the Title 24 energy standards in the state of California. And so for about 6 years, I was involved with writing the programs and teaching them from literally San Diego to Visalia. Hundreds of applicants, building designers, building officials. And so the programs that we developed for energy savings in California, I helped teach those for a few years. So it's something that's inbred, and everyone that comes into the office knows that that's something that we're known for quite extensively. So energy conservation is a very key element to this office, and that's something that I brought with me because it made sense.
We talked to everybody about that as well.
So. Did you? Oh, that's good.
Yes.
It's good they're talking about it.
They get it. I didn't type this, I like how this is typed. There must be a story about starting your own practice and your focus in energy conservation design. So I guess we kind of got the energy conservation design part. At what point did you realize you wanted to have your own practice?
I was working with an architect here in Newport Beach, Raleigh Pulaski and Associates, great firm. And what was really terrific about it is that Raleigh, who was a terrific sailor, loved to sail. There were 16 of us in the office that were architects, and so we had 16 little offices within his office. He was going to merge with another company, and at that point, I and about 7 of the other fellows architects in the office decided that we weren't going to be part of that transition, and that's when I decided to open my office. So I grabbed my goodies, my tools, and I went home, set up a board at the house, and became an architect on my own at that point.
In what year?
That was in 1974.
How did you decide to specialize in private homes?
I was working with an architect in Tucson, Arizona while I was in school, and I was one of the second guys in the design department. It was a 50-man office. And so I was in the design department, and for some reason, the principal of the office kept bringing me residential projects. And so I was designing homes for some of his clients, his friends actually, because the office did a mixture of commercial and residential work. I seemed to be the one that he tagged to do some of the residential projects, which really fed my energy and became something that instilled me in how to look at that, not only the processing, but the implementation also. So I was involved with the design, the construction documents, and the follow-through during construction on residential projects. I started my practice doing a mixture of commercial and residential, but then probably 15 years ago, I said, residential is what we do best. Let's just stick to that. And so we have been just very blessed with having some fabulous clients and doing some very unique work over that period of time. So the custom residence, be it large or small, we do small remodels, and we do 40, 50,000 square foot homes as well. So and the bandwidth that we have is, I think, what is impressive to a lot of people on the small projects as well as on the bigger projects.
Perfect. What do you consider most challenging about your work?
The most challenging thing that we have to deal with are those projects that tend to push the envelope, especially when they relate to the coastal environment along the 1,100 miles of coastal property in the state of California, which gets us to dealing with the California Coastal Commission. It's a formidable body that has a very important task to keep the California coast available for residents throughout the state of California, but they also have an important task of making sure that buildings don't gallop out past one another down the slopes and to the beach. But they become a very formidable, problematic type of a governing agency on our projects because we seem to run in loggerheads with some of their principles. And so getting projects through the Coastal Commission is difficult and challenging, but we've been very, very successful with it. The California Coastal Commission came into effect in 1976, and I was already up and running, and I've been dealing with them and their concern for the California coast since then, and I really can work our projects into approvable solutions by the Coastal Commission. But they're the most formidable agency to deal with these days. And the city of Laguna Beach, they have their concerns. Hard to know what the city is going to be requiring because they have a set of rules, but the rules don't really mean anything because it's the design review board who seems to enter in and define the role of the architect in the development of residences in Laguna Beach. So that's another area where it's challenging, but it's kind of fun.
When it's done.
When it's done, yeah. When we get the building permit and we're in construction, it's like we celebrate.
I understand. 4 more here. Do you have a favorite project?
I have favorite projects, and it seems that certain projects that become those signature projects of ours come about every 10 years. And I can track the history of the office and see about something that came up, the Rock House as an example in Laguna Beach, the Portobello House in Corona del Mar, the Airy Project, the Gucci House back in the mid-'80s. They seem to be the one that, like your children, when they grow up, they need your attention, and they become the most important thing in your life for a period of time. And so each one of those was the most important project at that time. Projects that we're working on now that we're able to implement new solar strategies or new ideas in design, those are the ones that challenge us the most, and we love those kinds of projects because it makes us all think. But the most exciting project I'm working on is the one that's soon to come into the office.
Perfect. It says we do a favorite way to design, but I don't know if that's...
My favorite way to design?
Yeah.
Actually, it's interesting. A glass of wine, kind of late at night, I listen to Wolfman Jack on the radio, and it seems the juices flow at that point. And one of my favorite places to do is a little mountain home that we have in Arrowbear. But it's when I can just put all the trappings of the daily activity aside, and I can just simply sit down and pull out the paper, the sketch paper, and let it flow. That's the best. No interruptions. Glass of red wine, and I'm on my way.
Sounds like it's been the same for a very long time, too.
Yes. Which is why I needed a wine cellar at my house to make sure I could handle that.
Nice. Tell me about your family and what do your children do?
My children are 2 boys. Bonnie and I have 2 boys, Jeff and Eric. Jeff is an architect in Long Beach who married also an architect that they met at the University of Arizona in Tucson. And my younger son, Eric, is a mechanical engineer in Boulder, Colorado. Both are involved with energy conservation, they're involved with sustainability design, and they're doing their part to help create an environment that is very friendly and will allow the planet to hopefully last longer. I warned both of the boys that they should become plumbers, because a plumber, works from 9 to 5, and then they get to go home. And lo and behold, all of a sudden, Jeff is now in architecture college and has his own practice now, about the same size as mine, and doing a fabulous job. So the saying that the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, I guess that really does work. And they're both good at it. And we often, with Bonnie in architecture and Jeff's wife Roberta, there's always conversation about architecture wherever we go, which it works this way because everybody's involved. But great kids. They have their own businesses and doing very well at what they do.
Perfect. Let me just check the camera real quick.
That rock house is like one of my favorite ones in Laguna. Growing up, I thought that was the coolest house. It's rocks.
The story with that too is really interesting, Taylor. 5 other architects had attempted houses on it. And I happened to be the 6th. I was up in my cabin and I'm looking at this rock and I'm thinking, wow, how do we deal with this? Everybody, they either chop the top of it off or they put their house on top of it. And nobody was going to approve those projects. So I said, well, why don't we just carve out the middle of it and keep the sides, and then I'll sneak the house back in it and put the landscaping back on top of it so it kind of looks like it did originally, but the house now snuck into it. It was well received.
No, it's so cool. You have to see it. It's so cool.
Yeah, there's some videos online on it too.
That's awesome.
It's coming back on the market again.
You can buy it.
I know.
Yeah, such a deal.
What do you want to be remembered for professionally?
I think if there's something that I hope people remember what we have done, and I say we because it's not just me, I have a team that is spectacular and very supportive. But I think probably the most important thing we can contribute to society are those projects that respect the environment and do it with a certain design panache that is unusual, thoughtful, organic, makes you think. If I get someone to stop and look at a project and say, wow, I don't fully understand it, but it's kind of cool, that's what I like to be remembered for. There are many projects that kind of fit that mold, some very eclectic and some that are just simply avant-garde design. And we like to be able to design projects in many spectrums. And we're pretty good at it too.
Very good. I heard somewhere that art is defined by someone looking at something you've done and creating a wonderment about how you did it.
That is so true too. Some of the projects we do, oddly enough, I don't know how to get to the finish line as I'm designing it, because it's not about the finish line that stimulates the programming and the design ideas. It's about creating something that's unique. Then we figure out, I sit down with my engineers and we all put our heads together and say, okay, I got this arch that's 160 feet long and it's going to be 28 feet high. How do we make that arch, period? Okay? You don't make it out of concrete because it's too heavy. You make it out of steel and then you clad it. Or do we do it with some other material like styrofoam and we interweave, steel structure into it? And so it becomes a process that there are times when we don't know where we're going with it, but we know we want it. So we drive in that direction to get there.
I love it. Last question I have in here, if we can add more, obviously, is what do you like to do when you're not doing architecture?
Well, interesting question. I think I'm always doing architecture. When I'm not, it's enjoying Bonnie. It's enjoying our kids. They're I have 6 grandsons, and they're all very unique, very great guys. And so when we do something, whether it's rafting on the Colorado rivers or it's, going sailing with the group from Long Beach, that is so much fun. I really love doing that. And we again talk about architecture the whole time we're out on these trips. So that's a great thing to do. Love to horseback ride. Getting out into the nature, the trails of the hills in Santa Monica or the Sierra Mountains. These are terrific, fun things to do. Like vacationing.
I want to add, just check my time real quick on the camera. Cool. I listen to a lot of podcasts about people who own their own businesses, their own companies, and some of them are a husband and wife team that work really well, and then some of them are definitely not. Tell me about Bonnie. Tell me, why has it worked? The two of you, you're married, you've raised kids, you also work together. You're together probably most of the day, every day, and it seems to work. How is that? How is that for the two of you?
It's a very interesting role that we each play in the office, and they're very different too. I kind of head the design team and the construction documents in the project here at the office, and Bonnie is handling the HR, the accounting, the business, the marketing, and I mean both of these, needless to say, are full-time jobs. The fact that we butt heads. But there are times when she's going to critique one of my projects, and it's like, what? I think that bathroom is fabulous, and you're criticizing it. But she's always right. And I say that because she's very intuitive. And I really enjoy her comments on our projects because they bring to light something that maybe I missed completely. But because we have very separate roles here at the office, there are days we go home and say, well, what did you do today? What happened in your office today? Because we may not even see one another in some days. But we both know that because it's a mom and pop kind of a business, we both pull our weight at a higher level. And we know we can rely on one another. And so I think that's one of the reasons, I'm sure that's one of the reasons we've been so successful.
Anything else you want to add? I can ask one more awkward question if I may.
Sure.
So I'm sure a lot of your friends, you're retiring at this point. I'm definitely not asking do you have plans to retire, but what's the future of the business? Are you doing this for the rest of the time, forever and ever and ever, or is there an exit plan? Or
retirement is a very odd thing to deal with. And when you're in the industry that we are, which has a lot to do with creativity and working with people's needs or wants and money, you have to be on your game. You can't sort of shirk that responsibility. It's pretty critical. And my retirement program says I'm going to be here until my face hits the desk and there's nothing left of me, and then they cart me off. As a matter of fact, I worked with a mechanical engineer in Tucson who was the great-grandson of John Paul Jones. His name was John Paul Jones. And he was in his late 80s when I came to work one day and someone said, hey, JPJ just crashed. What do you mean he crashed? Well, he passed away on his board. And it's always sat with me that he was doing what he really loved to do. And that's what I'm doing. So I quite suspect that I'll retire when the ticker stops, and someone cleans me off the desk. So there are no plans of retirement at this point. I'm having too much fun.
I figured that's what you were going to say, by the way.
Yeah.
Anything else you want
No,
to add?
it's a good life. It really is. I think there's a lot of merit at what makes this company really work well, and it's the team that I have. Amy, Martin, Wunsi, Lee, seniors that have been with me from almost 30 years to 20 years. Kathy, 15 years. These are people who make this operation run like clockwork. And when we have 12 or 15 projects in construction and designing 8 or 10 projects, it really takes everybody pulling together in the same direction to make that work successfully. And so I give a lot of credit to the whole makeup of the office and how well everybody works together. And we consistently grow organically. As Amy started 28 years ago in a support position, now she's my right hand gal in the office. Everybody started out by the bootstraps, and we lifted one another up, and they're all now quite accomplished. There are 4 licensed architects in the office, which is pretty doggone good for a staff of 10. But it's the teamwork that really makes this work, and everybody is a part of the success of the company.
Perfect.
Good.
I think that's it.